Hi guys, I'm Jeff and I've been talking to you in previous posts about Australia, how it was when I was growing up and what changes I've seen. And the last reel I made, check it out, was about the breakdown of the family unit and why I think it's happened. Anyway, today I'd like to talk about immigration. My thoughts on immigration and how that's also changed over the years. Now, I was born in Perth, Western Australia, and I lived there apart from a couple of overseas trips with my parents, 3 years in Singapore. Most of my sort of growing up years, teenage years, was spent in Perth, which is, even now, is a little bit quieter than the rest of Australia. It doesn't have as many immigrants there. Maybe the isolation, I'm not sure. Anyway, when I was growing up, there was basically no immigrants there at all. It was all white Australians like myself and Aboriginals. In saying that, there were market gardeners, couple of Chinese people there, but I never saw it in my school. My school, there was nothing. Okay, and then over east in Melbourne, I guess the first real immigrants were the Greeks. I don't know why they went there. Maybe it was after the Second World War. I'm not really too sure. They went there, they started buying fish and chip shops and grocery shops, market gardens, assimilated. Of course, they kept to their own small groups because obviously, if you have a common language, it's easier to talk to someone who you know. But they were didn't appear to be any trouble or any different to any other Australian living there. Then the New Zealanders came in, other Kiwis, Maoris, and the same thing. They just sort of came here to work and I guess they also tended to gather in their own groups, but yeah, that's fine. Then the English came, used to call them the £10 immigrants, TPIs. And a lot of them came to West Australia as well. And once again, they sort of tended to live in suburbs where there were other English people there. I guess it's just being familiar with what you know, I guess, but it was, I guess, easier for them because Australians, like, I was born here, my father was born here, and my mother, but originally we came from England, so English people coming here, we don't have any trouble with assimilating with the language, a couple of different customs, but nothing really too serious. Okay, and then in the days of the Vietnam War, we started to get a lot of Vietnamese refugees. And once again, they've sort of been here a long time now. They sort of tended to keep to themselves. And then, of course, their kids go to school, meet Australians, they learn to speak English, and then a couple of them get into relationships. They have children, and so now the original immigrants are now sort of grandparents, and their children may may have had an Aussie partner, and so their kids are half Australian, half Vietnamese. Australian, but I mean like bloodlines, half Australian, half Vietnamese, and once again they're also workers and assimilated into the situation here. Other Filipinos came, mainly in Sydney, and the same thing, they were hard workers. Come here, once again, you know, they keep in their own groups, but they make an effort to speak English and try to fit in. Then we started getting a big influx of refugees from Afghanistan and the Middle East there, and they started arriving on boats illegally, but once they landed on Australian shores, and they used to land on Christmas Island, which is about 2,000 miles west of Australia, just off the coast of Indonesia, but because it's an Australian territory that made it to Australia. So Australia was obligated to go and pick them up, bring them here, process them, but it was all young males, no women, no children, and basically uneducated, unskilled, no passports, throw their passports overboard on the way here, so the government had no idea who they were. And yeah, they're a bit of a problem, that's for sure. And they made their way to Australia via the top of India, Malaysia, over to Indonesia, and then on to Australia. Obviously, the other countries weren't as rich as Australia is, and wasn't as willing to give them all the benefits which they sort of seem to think they're entitled to. And they weren't really accepted as well as what the other immigrants were. They sort of kept to themselves. They're overrepresented in the prison system. You know, you've heard that Switzerland, Germany, Turkey, more than 50% of their inmates are immigrants, refugees, border crossers. Australia's basically the same. There's a lot of crime, and most of the crime is committed by these other groups. The Vietnamese had their own gangs, don't worry about that, but there wasn't the, I don't know, I have to be a little bit careful to say, but there's a lot of rapings in that nowadays, and they all sort of seem to be by Middle Eastern men, where their culture, I don't think it frowns on it as much as what Western society does, but anyway, they've sort of brought that here. Now it's Africans. And once again, I know a lot of Africans, and I've worked with them, and you know, they're fine, but there's a lot of Africans who are unskilled, uneducated, can't speak English. They don't want to work, they just want to bring their problems here. They're sort of fighting amongst themselves. And I don't really know why Australia has become a dumping ground for basically for these unwanted, not illegal immigrants, because they've been brought here, I believe, to bolster the votes for the current leadership group, Albanese, and everyone says that he's buying votes, and I don't really want to get into what he's been up to recently at the UN, recognising Palestine as a state. Recognising what? Where's the land? What's the capital? Who's the leader? Anyway, I'll leave that, but I'm sort of going to talk about that at a later date, because I'm quite passionate about what he is sort of doing to Australia. But we're sort of talking about immigration. There's something going on. I don't know what it is. I'm not a political correspondent. I'm not a economics master. I just know that there is a reason why all these dark-skinned races are starting to infiltrate the Western world. And I know there's a superior motive there, and I just don't know what it is. I know anyway. I guess you've heard it all before, and a lot of you have the same outlook on it as what I have. But I'm sure there's some reason why they're bringing these immigrants in, and it isn't just buying votes. But basically, to summarise it, every ethnic group that immigrated here went through a little bit of racism and a little bit of hard times establishing themselves, but they were all here for one common reason, and that was to live in Australia, the lucky land, work, and just assimilate where you can. And that's good, They brought different cultures to the country. They brought different foods here. Who doesn't like going out and eating Vietnamese food or Chinese food or Malaysian food, Filipino food? Everyone does, right? But just the last couple of years, the immigration has completely changed to the point now where I'm scared. I don't know where Australia's going, and yeah. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that subject.